The powerful businessman's twin daughters were wasting away in silence, days without eating, trapped in abandonment and indifference, until the cleaning lady, driven by compassion and courage, broke the rules, fed the girls, and prevented an irreversible tragedy from happening. I'll begin the complete translation from Portuguese to English, changing names and locations to English equivalents, while maintaining the original length and structure of the story. The office on the 23rd floor offered a privileged view of London, but Robert barely noticed the landscape that stretched beyond the panoramic windows. His eyes traced the numbers on the computer screen with the same mechanical precision he applied to everything in his life. At 42 years old, he had built an empire based on planning, discipline, and absolute control over every possible variable. The door opened without warning, and Victoria entered carrying a coffee cup that wasn't for him. She never knocked. In 3 years of relationship, she had learned that Robert hated interruptions, but also that he would never reprimand her for it. It was one of many unspoken silences between them. "How late are you working today?" she asked, leaning against his desk with studied familiarity. Robert looked up. Victoria wore the grey suit he had commented looked good on her. At 37, she maintained the elegant posture of someone who grew up knowing exactly where she wanted to go. Marketing director of a multinational company, Victoria had built her career with the same determination that Robert applied to business. "I'll finish at 8, he replied, already anticipating what would come next. "Elizabeth called earlier. She wants to know if we're going to her son's baptism on Saturday." Robert sighed. Elizabeth was Victoria's cousin, married for 5 years and mother of 2 children. Their family gatherings were minefields disguised as Sunday lunches. "You know I don't like those things." "They're not those things, Robert. It's family, and—" Victoria hesitated, fidgeting with the cup handle. She mentioned they're trying for a 3rd child. The silence that followed carried the weight of all the conversations they hadn't finished. Robert knew that tone. It was the same one Victoria used when she wanted to touch on subjects they both avoided. "Victoria, we've already talked about this." "No, we've never really talked about this." Her voice hardened. "You always change the subject or deflect." Robert slowly closed the laptop, a gesture that signaled the end of work hours and the beginning of a discussion that had been repeating for months. He stood up, walked around the desk and faced her. Victoria crossed her arms, a physical barrier to accompany the emotional one rising between them. "All right," he said, "let's talk. What do you want to know?" "I want to know why the idea of having children consumes you like this. Why you look at every child on the street as if they were a reminder of what you're missing." The question hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. He didn't know it was so obvious. "Because I want to be a father," he answered with brutal simplicity. "I always have. Since I was little, I imagined what it would be like to have children, teach them, watch them grow. It's like part of me has been waiting for this." Victoria lowered her eyes to the empty cup in her hands. "And I never wanted it. Also, since I was little, I look at children and see responsibilities I don't want to carry, freedoms I don't want to lose. It's as if every fiber of my being says no." The raw honesty of the words created an abyss between them that seemed unbridgeable. Robert approached, touched her arm gently. "But you might change your mind. Many women—" "No," Victoria interrupted him, raising her gaze. "I won't change my mind, and you need to stop waiting for that to happen." Robert felt something shatter inside him. For months he had fed the silent hope that time, or the love he felt for Victoria, or simply life itself, would resolve this incompatibility. But the firmness in her voice made it clear he was deceiving himself. "What if I can't stop wanting it? Then we have a problem," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. The phone rang on the desk, but neither of them moved to answer it. The sound echoed in the empty office until it died alone. Victoria placed the cup on the desk with a small noise that seemed deafening in the silence. "I'm going home," she said. "I need to think." "Vic, wait." But she was already at the door, back straight, walking with the same determination she brought to boardrooms. Robert stood still, watching the empty space she had left, feeling that something fundamental had just broken between them. Outside, the city was preparing for night. Millions of people were going home, to their families, to their lives, organized around choices that made sense. Robert wondered when it had become so difficult to simply want the simple things in life. He returned to the desk, reopened the laptop, and tried to concentrate on the numbers. But all he could think about was the expression on Victoria's face when she said they had a problem, as if she already knew that some problems have no solution. Sarah woke at 5 in the morning without needing an alarm. The two-room apartment in East London was silent, but she had already learned that dawn silences were different from afternoon silences. At dawn, they brought peace. In the afternoon, they reminded her she was alone. She prepared the strong black coffee that kept her awake during double shifts, put on her navy blue uniform, and checked her backpack. 3 jobs meant 3 different uniforms, and the art of transforming into different people throughout the day. In the morning, she was a cleaner in the downtown commercial building. In the afternoon, she cared for Mrs. Williams, an 80-year-old who confused Sarah with her dead granddaughter. At night, when she could manage it, she cleaned family homes. At 29, Sarah had perfected invisibility. She knew how to clean an environment without anyone noticing her presence, how to care for someone without creating bonds that would hurt when they ended, how to survive being useful without being seen. The bus to downtown was packed as always. Sarah squeezed between a worker who smelled of welding and a woman talking loudly on the phone about marriage problems. She rested her head against the window and watched the city wake up. London never slept completely, but there was a moment between night and day when it pretended to rest. The Canary Wharf business tower had 27 floors, and a routine Sarah knew by heart. She always started on the ground floor, methodically went up, finished in the executive offices. The upper floors were different, silent, with thick carpets that muffled any sound and air conditioning that kept the temperature constant, as if there were no seasons outside. It was on the 23rd floor that Sarah first encountered Robert. It was 7:30 in the morning, very early for any executive to be working, but he was there, sitting behind an imposing desk, looking at the computer screen with a concentration that seemed painful. Sarah knocked lightly on the half-open door. "Excuse me, can I do the cleaning?" Robert looked up and Sarah noticed his eyes were red, as if he had spent the night without sleeping or crying. "Maybe both." "Of course. Sorry, I didn't know you started this early." "We always start early on the executive floors," Sarah explained, pushing the cart into the room. "That way we don't disturb your work." She began by emptying the trash cans, changing the plastic bags with efficient movements. Robert went back to typing, but Sarah could tell he was watching her from the corner of his eye. It wasn't uncommon. Some executives felt uncomfortable with the presence of cleaners, as if they were reminded of a reality they preferred to ignore. "How long have you worked here?" he asked suddenly. Sarah stopped cleaning the conference table. It was rare for someone to ask personal questions. 3 years. "Do you like the work?" She hesitated. It was a strange question, coming from someone who probably earned in a month what she earned in a year. "It's honest work," she replied. Robert nodded, as if the answer made sense to him in a way Sarah couldn't understand. She continued cleaning, wiping the furniture, organizing the papers scattered on the desk. That's when she saw the photo. It was small, discreet, almost hidden among the documents. An ultrasound. Sarah recognized it immediately. She had seen so many at the hospital where she worked for a few months, years ago. The grainy image of a baby, still in formation. "Sorry," she murmured, realizing she had stopped to look. Robert followed her gaze and saw the photo. His expression closed completely, like a door slamming. "You can leave that there," he said, quickly putting the ultrasound in a drawer. Sarah finished cleaning in silence, but something had changed in the air. When she was leaving, Robert called her. "What's your name?" "Sarah." "Thank you, Sarah, for the work." She nodded and left, pushing the cart down the corridor. But throughout the rest of the day, she couldn't stop thinking about the sadness she saw in his eyes, nor the way he put away that photo as if it were a painful secret. That night, while caring for Mrs. Williams, who insisted on calling her "my dear granddaughter," Sarah found herself thinking about Robert. There was something about him she recognized. A loneliness that disguised itself as control, a sadness that hid behind success. She knew that sadness. She had lived with it for 4 years, since the day she lost the baby she was expecting, since the day the life she had planned disappeared along with a child she never got to know. Sarah shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to create connections with people who lived in worlds completely different from hers. She had learned that survival depended on maintaining safe distances. But that night, she dreamed of ultrasounds and sad men in empty offices. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks after their first meeting in the office. Victoria had gone to a meeting in another city and wouldn't return until the next day. Robert stayed in the office until later, trying to lose himself in numbers and reports that used to occupy his mind completely. It wasn't working. For days, every conversation with Victoria ended in silence. They still shared the same bed, but it was as if there were an invisible abyss between them. She arrived late from work. He left early. They talked about bills, social commitments, the weather. Never again about children. Sarah appeared at the door at 8:15, as always. Robert had begun to notice her schedules. The way she moved the cart silently through the corridors, how she managed to clean an entire environment without making noise. "Good evening," she greeted, hesitating at the entrance. "May I come in?" "Of course." Robert saved the document he was editing. "Sorry for being here so late. It must interfere with your routine." "It doesn't interfere." Sarah entered, but didn't bring the cart. "May I ask you something?" The informality surprised him. In 3 weeks of daily encounters, their conversations had never gone beyond polite greetings. "You may." "Are you all right, sir? Forgive my boldness, but you seem like you haven't been sleeping." Robert laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the empty room. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah approached a little, but maintained respectful distance from the desk. "My mother always said that sadness shows first in the eyes, then in the way of sitting, speaking, breathing." "Your mother was wise." "She was." Sarah seemed to hesitate before continuing. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Sarah looked through the window, where rain ran down, forming improvised rivers on the glass. "She always told me that trapped sadness poisoned from within, that it needed to find a way out." Robert studied her face. There was something about Sarah that calmed him. Maybe it was the simplicity of her words, or the way she spoke without judging, just observing. "It's complicated," he said finally. "It always is." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Sarah began arranging the papers on the desk, careful movements that showed respect for his personal space. "Can I tell you something strange?" Robert asked, surprising himself. Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "I dream about children I don't have. I dream that I'm a father, that I'm teaching a child to ride a bicycle, that I'm reading stories before bedtime. I wake up, and for a few seconds I can still smell children's shampoo. I can still hear laughter echoing through the house." He paused, realizing he was revealing more than he intended. "Pathetic, isn't it?" "No," Sarah replied firmly. It's not pathetic, it's human. Robert observed her. There was something in her voice, an understanding that went beyond words. And you? Do you have children? The question seemed to hit her physically. Sarah stiffened, gripping the cloth she was holding more tightly. No, she replied quietly. Do you want to have them? Sarah hesitated, as if the words were stones in her throat. I wanted to. Once. Robert realized he had touched a wound. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. No, it's all right. Sarah went back to arranging the papers, but her movements now were less precise. It's good to talk sometimes. My mother was right. What happened? Sarah stopped completely. She stood beside the desk, looking at her hands, and Robert saw a tear fall onto the document she was arranging. I was 5 months pregnant. It was a girl. We were going to call her Sophie. Her voice broke slightly. One day I woke up with pain, a lot of blood when we got to the hospital, and she was already dead. Robert felt his chest tighten. He stood up instinctively, but didn't know if he should approach. Sarah, the doctor said it happens sometimes. No explanation, no fault. But we always think it's our fault, don't we? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sorry. I shouldn't be talking about this here. Don't apologize, Robert said, walking around the desk to get closer to her. Thank you for telling me. Sarah raised her eyes to him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two completely different people, from worlds that would never touch under normal circumstances, united by understanding losses that had no name. Sophie would be 4 years old now, she murmured. What was the father like? Sarah smiled sadly. He ran away when he found out about the pregnancy, came back after the funeral saying he wanted to help me, but I already knew he only felt pity. It didn't work out. Robert nodded. And since then you work alone, take care of others. It's safer, she admitted, doesn't hurt as much. They stayed in silence for a few minutes, the rain drumming against the window like melancholy music. Robert realized that for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. Sarah, he said, thank you. For what? For reminding me that there are good people in the world. She smiled. A small but genuine smile, and went back to work. But something had changed between them. A bridge had been built where before there was only the safe distance between employer and employee. When Sarah left, Robert stayed for a long time looking at the chair where she had sat. He thought about Victoria, at home, probably planning the next work meeting. He thought about Sarah, going home alone after a full day caring for others. And he wondered when it had been the last time someone had genuinely cared about him. The end came on a Friday, without warning, like most important things in life. Robert arrived home and found Victoria's suitcase packed in the entrance. She was sitting on the living room sofa, hands crossed in her lap, the upright posture she assumed before difficult presentations at work. Vic? She looked up. There was no anger there. No tears, just a determination he recognized immediately, and that made him understand, even before she spoke, that this conversation would change everything. I'm leaving, Robert. The words hung suspended in the air between them. Robert let his work briefcase fall to the floor and approached slowly, as if sudden movements might make real what still seemed impossible. Why? Because we both deserve to be happy, she replied, with a simplicity that hurt more than any scream. And we can't be happy together. Robert sat in the armchair facing the sofa, keeping his distance. After 3 years, he knew Victoria well enough to know she had thought a lot before reaching this decision. We can talk, try to find a middle ground. What middle ground, Robert? Victoria leaned forward, hands still intertwined. I get pregnant and spend 9 months unhappy, generate a child I don't want, and then spend the rest of my life pretending I don't resent it. Or you give up being a father and spend the rest of your life looking at me as if I had stolen your future. The rawness of the analysis hit him like a punch. Victoria always had this ability to see things with brutal clarity, to name exactly what was happening when he was still trying to negotiate with reality. Maybe with time you... No, she shook her head. I won't change my mind, and you won't stop wanting to be a father. These things don't change, Robert. We just learn to live with frustration until it turns into resentment. Robert looked at the suitcase in the entrance, at the woman he loved sitting across from him, talking about their end, as if it were a project that didn't work out. I love you, he said, because he didn't know what else to say. I love you too, she replied, and the gentleness in her voice made everything even more painful. That's why I'm leaving, because I love you too much to stay and watch you be unhappy. Victoria stood up, took the suitcase. Robert remained seated, still processing that 3 years were ending in a 15-minute conversation. I'll stay at my sister's apartment for now. Later I'll see if I can get something of my own. She stopped at the door, without turning around. Robert? What? You're going to be an incredible father when you find the right person. The door closed with a soft click. Robert was left alone in the living room, looking at the empty space where the suitcase had been. The house was too quiet, as if even the furniture knew something fundamental had ended. He spent the entire weekend in the office. He worked, slept on the leather sofa in the conference room, ordered food through apps. On Monday, when Sarah came for cleaning, she found him still there, in front of the computer, wearing the same clothes from Friday. Good morning, she greeted hesitantly. Good morning, Sarah. She began working, but Robert could tell she was watching him discreetly. After a few minutes, she stopped. May I ask if something happened? Robert laughed, a humorless sound. My girlfriend left me on Friday. Sarah stopped cleaning completely. I'm sorry. She was right, he continued, more to himself than to her. We wanted different things. She was brave enough to admit it wouldn't work out. Sarah approached the desk, but didn't sit down. Do you want to talk about it? There's not much to talk about. I wanted children, she didn't. End of story. You've been here in the office for 3 days. Robert looked at her. How do you know? Because I come here every day, and every day you were here. Sarah hesitated. When was the last time you ate something that didn't come in a box? The question caught him off guard. He tried to remember, but the last few days were a fog of work and failed attempts not to think. I don't know, he admitted. I'll make some coffee, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. She left and returned 10 minutes later with 2 cups. The coffee was strong and hot, and had the taste of homemade care that Robert had forgotten existed. Thank you. They drank in silence for a few minutes. Sarah had sat in the chair in front of the desk, and for the first time Robert really noticed her. The way she held the cup with both hands, the care with which she drank, as if she knew how to value small, good things. Sarah, he said suddenly, do you think it's selfish to want children when you know it will hurt someone you love? She thought before answering. I think it's human. Wanting the things we want. Selfishness would be trying to force the other person to want the same thing. But what if you can't stop wanting? Then you look for another way to be happy, she said simply. Or you look for someone who wants the same things you do. Robert nodded. It was logical, simple, but for some reason it had taken 3 years to hear someone say it so clearly. You're wise, Sarah. No, I'm not. I just learned some things the hard way. They finished the coffee and Sarah went back to work. But when she was leaving, Robert called her. Sarah, thank you, not just for the coffee, for being here. She smiled. We need to take care of each other. That's how it works. After she left, Robert packed his things and went home. He showered, ate a decent meal, slept in his own bed, For the first time in days, he didn't dream about Victoria leaving. He dreamed about a child laughing while running through a garden he didn't recognize. 2 months after the separation, Robert had established a routine that worked like anesthesia. He woke up at 6, worked until late, ate dinner alone, while watching news about subjects that didn't interest him. Weekends dragged on with work projects he invented so he wouldn't have to think about the silent house. Sarah had become the only constant in his days. Not that they talked much, she respected his space, did her work with the silent efficiency she always had. But there was a tacit understanding between them, born from that night when they shared their losses. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes just a good night warmer than normal. Small gestures that reminded Robert he was still human. It was on a Thursday that life decided to change the rules of the game. The phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. Robert was in a meeting with investors when his secretary appeared at the door with an expression he had never seen. She made a discreet signal, and he excused himself. "It's urgent, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Victoria." Robert felt his chest tighten. In 2 months, Victoria hadn't made any contact. They had divided their assets through lawyers with the coldness of a commercial transaction. "Hello." "Robert, it's me." Victoria's voice was strange, too controlled. "I need to talk to you." "Of course, what happened?" A long pause. Robert heard her breathing on the other side of the line, irregular, as if she were preparing for something very difficult. "In person, can we meet tonight?" "Vic, is everything all right? Not over the phone, please." Her tone scared him. There was a fragility that contrasted with the determined woman who had left home 2 months ago. "Of course, where?" "At the cafe where we met, 8 o'clock. The call ended before he could respond. Robert stared at the phone, trying to decipher what was in Victoria's voice. Fear, regret, something worse. The rest of the afternoon dragged. Robert cancelled 2 meetings and left the office early, but instead of going straight home, he drove around the city, trying to prepare for a conversation he didn't know how it would be. The Central Cafe was full as always at 8 in the evening. Robert arrived first, chose a table in the back and ordered water. His hands were shaking slightly, and he was irritated with his own anxiety. They were adults, civilized people. Whatever Victoria needed to say, they could resolve it. She arrived 15 minutes late, which was unusual. Victoria had always been extremely punctual. When Robert saw her enter, looking for him among the tables, he had the impression she had lost weight. Her face was more angular, and there was something in her posture that suggested carefully disguised fragility. "Hi," she said, sitting down. "Hi, how are you?" Victoria ordered tea from the waitress and kept fidgeting with her purse strap, a nervous gesture Robert didn't remember seeing before. "I need to tell you something," she began, without beating around the bush. "And I don't know how to do this." Robert's heart raced. "Are you sick?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "No, it's not that. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. "I'm pregnant, Robert." The world stopped. Robert heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away, as if someone were speaking through water. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "I'm 12 weeks along," she continued, her voice almost a whisper. "They're twins." Twins! The information ricocheted in Robert's mind like a ping-pong ball. He tried to process. Victoria, pregnant. His 2 children. "How? When?" He managed to murmur, "Our last night together, before I left." Victoria looked at her own hands. "I didn't know. I found out 3 weeks ago when I started feeling sick." Robert leaned forward, trying to understand. "Why did you take so long to tell me?" "Because I didn't know what to do." Her voice broke slightly. "Because first I thought about not having them. Then I thought about having them and never telling you. Then I thought about running away to another country." She raised her eyes, and Robert saw tears there. "I spent 3 weeks thinking about every possible option. And now? Victoria took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. I'm going to have the girls. I'm going to carry the pregnancy to term. She paused, and when she continued, the words came tumbling out, as if she needed to say everything before losing courage. But I'm not going to raise them, Robert. I can't. I can't. I've tried to imagine myself being a mother, and I can't. The statement hit Robert like lightning. He tried to speak, but she continued. If you want them, they're yours. Completely yours. I'll sign any papers, give up any rights. After they're born, I'll leave your lives forever. Victoria was crying now, silent tears running down her face. But if you don't want them, I'll look for another family, a family that really wants them. Robert was silent for what seemed like an eternity. The cafe around them continued functioning. Conversations, laughter, the sound of cups clinking on saucers. Normal life happening while his was completely reorganizing. Are you sure, he asked finally, about the pregnancy? Yes. I did 3 tests. No. About not wanting to raise them. Victoria closed her eyes. I look at the future and see freedom, career, travel, choices. When I try to put children in that image, everything goes dark, as if I can't breathe. She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. I know how this sounds. I know it must seem monstrous. But I'd rather admit this now than pretend for 18 years and end up hurting everyone. Robert nodded slowly. It was courageous, in a brutal and honest way, that he didn't know whether to admire or fear. They're my daughters, he said, more to himself than to her. They are. 2 girls. They are. Robert felt something expand inside his chest, a mixture of joy, terror, and responsibility that left him dizzy. Everything he had always wanted was being offered in the most unlikely way possible. I'll raise them, he said, and the words came out with a certainty that surprised him. Alone, if necessary. Victoria smiled for the first time since arriving, a sad but relieved smile. Thank you, she murmured. They sat in silence, processing what had just been decided. 2 lives that had separated were now connected in a way that could never be undone. How are we going to do this? Robert asked. I don't know, Victoria admitted, but we'll figure it out. The following months passed like a movie in slow motion and double speed at the same time. Robert dove into books about parenting, consulted doctors, renovated a room in the house, transforming it into a nursery. 2 cribs, 2 dressers, 2 of everything. The reality that he would be a single father of twins hit him in waves. Moments of absolute euphoria, followed by paralyzing panic. Victoria kept her word about maintaining distance, but appeared for all medical appointments. Robert watched her during ultrasounds, trying to decipher what he saw in her face when the images of the girls appeared on the screen. There was something there. Not maternal love, but also not indifference. A complex mixture of responsibility and detachment that he couldn't completely understand. They're growing well, said the doctor during the 7-month consultation. Ideal weight for twins, correct positioning. Have you chosen names? Robert looked at Victoria. It was a conversation they had carefully avoided. I'm not going to choose names, she said calmly. It's Robert's decision. The doctor seemed uncomfortable with the coldness of the response, but didn't comment. Robert wondered how many times Victoria had needed to explain the situation to strangers, always with the same composure she used to present reports at work. Sophie, Robert said suddenly. One of them will be called Sophie. Victoria looked at him with surprise. It was the first time he had suggested a specific name. Why Sophie? Robert hesitated. He couldn't explain that the name came from a conversation with Sarah, from a child who was never born but had left a mark on the woman who cleaned his office every night. I like the name, he said simply. And the other? Emma. Victoria nodded. Sophie and Emma. That's nice. It was the longest conversation they'd had in weeks. Sarah had become his unofficial confidant during this period. She never asked directly about the pregnancy, but Robert could tell she noticed everything. The books about babies on the desk, the calls to baby product stores, the way he sometimes stood staring at nothing with an expression that mixed joy and terror. "May I ask something?" she said one October night while organizing the papers on his desk. "Of course." "Are you scared, sir?" The question was direct, without beating around the bush. Typical of Sarah. "Terrified," he admitted. "2 children, Sarah, alone. What if I can't handle it? What if they need things I don't know how to give?" Sarah stopped what she was doing and sat in the chair in front of the desk. It was a gesture she made only when she felt the conversation was important. "Can I tell you something about Sophie?" "My Sophie?" Robert nodded. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked completely. I didn't know anything about babies. I had never changed a diaper in my life. I spent hours on the internet researching child development, breastfeeding, 1,000 things that could go wrong." Sarah smiled sadly. "One day my mother found me crying over an article that said babies could die if they slept on their stomachs." "What did she say?" "That love doesn't come with an instruction manual, that we learn by doing, making mistakes, trying again, and that the fact I was scared meant I already loved that child." Robert felt something warm in his chest. "Do you think I'll love them?" "I think you already love them," Sarah said simply. "I saw the look on your face when you said their names." It was true. Robert already talked to Sophie and Emma when he was alone at home, telling them about his day, about the plans he had for them. He already imagined what it would be like to teach them to walk, to read, to comfort them when they cried. "What if it's not enough?" he asked. "What if they need a mother?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with her hands. "Everyone needs love, care, attention. Sometimes that comes from a mother, sometimes from a father, sometimes from other people. The important thing is that it comes." "Other people? Like who?" "Like grandparents, aunts and uncles, friends." Sarah hesitated. "Like people who choose to love a child even when they're not obligated to." There was something in her voice, a contained intensity that made Robert look at her more carefully. "Sarah, do you want to meet them when they're born?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her cheeks flushed slightly. "I don't know if it would be appropriate." "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because I'm your employee. Because our worlds are very different. Because—" She stopped, as if she were about to say something important and then thought better of it. "Because what?" Sarah stood up, going back to arranging papers with movements more abrupt than normal. "Because I'm afraid of getting attached," she said quietly, "and not being able to help when they need it." Robert kept looking at her, realizing for the first time that Sarah might feel the same loneliness he felt, that maybe she was also navigating a life that hadn't turned out as planned. "Sarah," he said gently, "you don't need to be afraid of getting attached. Good people in the girls' lives will always be welcome." She raised her eyes to him, and for a moment Robert saw pure vulnerability there, as if she were fighting against the desire to believe she could be part of something, of a family, even if from the sidelines. "Thank you," she murmured. When Sarah left that night, Robert thought about the conversation. For the first time since learning about the pregnancy, he didn't feel completely alone. Maybe, he thought, families weren't just about blood and marriage. Maybe they were about people who chose to be present. 2 weeks later, Victoria went into labour. The private hospital in London was silent at 3 in the morning. Robert paced the maternity ward corridor like a caged animal, stopping every few steps to look through the operating room window. The cesarean had started 40 minutes ago, but to him It seemed like an eternity. Victoria had insisted he not enter the room. "It'll be easier this way," she had said, and Robert respected the decision, even though he didn't completely understand it. Now he regretted it. His daughters were being born on the other side of that wall, and he wasn't there. "Mr. Thompson?" Robert turned around. A nurse was smiling at him, holding 2 small pink bundles. "Would you like to meet your daughters?" The world stopped. Robert approached with trembling steps, and when he saw the small, wrinkled faces of the girls, he felt something shatter and reconstruct at the same time inside his chest. They were real. They were his. They were alive and breathing and looking at him with curious dark eyes. "This is Sophie," said the nurse, placing one of the babies in his arms. 7 pounds and 1 ounce. Cried as soon as she was born. Sophie was tiny, but Robert could feel the strength in her small, clenched fists. When she opened her eyes and looked at him, he was certain she recognized him, even knowing it was impossible. "And this is Emma," continued the nurse, helping him hold both. 6 pounds and 13 ounces, quieter than her sister. Emma had her eyes closed and breathed with small, soft sighs. Robert gently touched her face, marveled by the perfection of the small features. "Are they all right?" he asked, his voice choked. "Perfect. They'll go straight to the room with you." "And the mother?" The nurse hesitated for a second. "She's fine. Asked not to be disturbed for now. Said you would understand." Robert nodded. Even in that moment, Victoria maintained the distance she had promised. Part of him was hurt, but the bigger part was too busy contemplating the 2 small lives in his arms to think about anything else. The private room was spacious and silent. Robert sat in the armchair next to the cribs and simply looked at the girls. From time to time, one of them moved or made a small noise, and he felt his heart race, ready to attend to any need. At 6 in the morning, a nurse entered to check on the babies and found Robert asleep in the armchair, with Sophie in his arms, and Emma sleeping in the crib beside him. "Mr. Thompson?" He woke up startled, immediately checking if Sophie was all right. "Everything's fine," the nurse smiled, "but we need to bathe them, and you need to learn about feeding. I brought formula since the mother." "Since the mother won't be breastfeeding," Robert completed. "I know." The next hours were a whirlwind of instructions about bottles, diapers, feeding schedules. Robert tried to absorb everything but felt completely lost. How could something so small be so complicated? Sophie cried whenever they put her in the crib. Emma refused the bottle and only stopped crying when Robert held her. By noon, he was exhausted and beginning to panic. "It's normal," said the head nurse, an experienced woman of about 50. "Babies sense when parents are nervous. They just need to get used to you." "What if they don't get used to me?" "They will, but it'll take time and patience." Robert thought about Sarah, about the conversation about love not coming with instruction manuals. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. In the late afternoon, a pediatrician came to examine the girls. They were healthy, but had lost weight. Normal for newborns, he explained. Still, Robert worried. "Can I take them home tomorrow?" "Yes, if they continue stable, but Mr. Thompson—" The doctor hesitated. "May I give you some advice?" "Of course. Consider hiring an experienced nanny, at least for the first few weeks. Twins are challenging, even for experienced couples. Alone, it's going to be very difficult." Robert nodded. He had already thought about this, already had contacts, but part of him wanted to do everything alone, prove to himself that he could be the father his daughters needed. That night, when the girls finally fell asleep, Robert allowed himself to leave the room for a few minutes. He bought coffee from the machine in the hallway and called Sarah. "Sarah, it's me, Robert." "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right?" "They were born, Sophie and Emma, this morning." There was a pause on the other side of the line. Robert could hear traffic noise in the background. Sarah was coming home from work. How are they? Perfect, small but perfect. Robert smiled, even alone in the corridor. Sarah, I want you to meet them when I bring them home. Are you sure? Absolutely. You're important to me. I want you to be important to them too. Sarah was quiet for so long that Robert thought the call had dropped. Sarah? I'm here. It would be an honor. Thank you very much. When he hung up, Robert returned to the room and found Sophie awake in the crib, looking at the ceiling with curiosity. He picked her up and sat in the armchair. You're going to like Sarah, he murmured to the baby. She's special, and you're going to need special people in your life. Sophie seemed to listen, her small eyes fixed on her father's face. Emma stirred in the crib beside them, but didn't wake up. For the first time since learning he would be a father, Robert felt truly calm. He didn't have all the answers, didn't know what lay ahead, but there in that silent hospital room, holding his daughter while the other slept beside him, he knew he was exactly where he should be. Outside, London continued its frenetic nightlife, but for Robert, the world had reduced to that armchair, to those two small people who depended completely on him. And for the first time in his life, that didn't scare him. It felt right. The first week at home was a silent hell. Robert had read about sleep deprivation, about babies who cried, about the learning curve of parenthood. But nothing had prepared him for the brutal reality of caring alone for newborn twins. Sophie and Emma cried in shifts, as if they had conspired to ensure he never slept more than 40 minutes in a row. When one finally calmed down, the other woke up. When both slept, Robert lay awake listening to their breathing, terrified that something might go wrong. The first nanny lasted 3 days. An experienced woman with excellent references, she quit on a particularly difficult morning when Sophie rejected 5 consecutive bottles and Emma cried for 2 hours straight. "Mr. Thompson," she said, putting her bag on her shoulder, "I've cared for dozens of babies in 40 years of career, but these girls, there's something wrong. They won't calm down with anything I do." The second nanny lasted 2 days. The third, only 1. "They won't accept bottles from anyone else," explained the third, an apparently unshakable lady who had raised 5 children of her own. "It's as if they reject anyone who isn't you, and even with you, they barely eat." Robert was desperate. The girls were losing weight rapidly. The pediatrician had scheduled daily appointments, talking about warning signs and need for intervention with a gravity that made Robert's stomach churn. It was on a Thursday, after a night when neither baby had slept more than 15 minutes straight, that Robert finally collapsed. He was on the floor of the girls' room, holding Sophie, who refused another bottle, while Emma cried in the crib when he simply started crying too. "Please," he begged Sophie, tears running down his face. "Please, just drink a little. You need to eat." That's when the doorbell rang. Robert put Sophie in the crib, which immediately increased the volume of crying, and went to answer the door with dishevelled hair and a shirt stained with milk. It was Sarah, carrying a grocery bag. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" She looked at him, at his state, and then at the sound of crying coming from the girl's room. "You didn't show up at the office yesterday, or today." "I thought that." She hesitated. "I brought some things. May I come in?" Robert nodded, too embarrassed to protest. Sarah entered and followed the sound of crying to the baby's room. She stopped at the door, observing Sophie and Emma in their cribs, both crying with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to their size. "How long have they been like this?" 3 days, Robert admitted. "Almost non-stop. They won't eat, won't sleep. The doctor said if they don't improve by tomorrow, they'll have to be hospitalized for tube feeding." Sarah put the bag on the floor and approached Sophie's crib. The baby was red from crying so much. Small fists clenched, body rigid with tension. "May I pick her up?" Robert hesitated. "She won't stop crying with anyone. 3 different nannies have already tried." "May I try?" There was something in Sarah's voice, a calm that contrasted with the desperation taking over the room. Robert nodded. Sarah washed her hands quickly and then picked Sophie up from the crib. To Robert's surprise, she didn't immediately try to calm the baby. Instead, she held her firmly against her chest and simply stayed there, letting Sophie cry. "It's all right," she murmured, not for the baby to stop crying, but as if acknowledging that crying was valid. "It's all right. You can cry." Gradually, Sophie's crying began to diminish. It didn't stop completely, but lost the desperate quality it had before. Sarah began walking slowly around the room, rocking her with gentle movements. "Now, let's try to eat a little," Sarah said, taking the bottle. "Just a little." To Robert's complete incredulity, Sophie accepted the bottle. She didn't drink much, but she drank. And when she finished, she fell asleep in Sarah's arms. "How did you do that?" Sarah carefully placed Sophie in the crib and turned to Emma, who was still crying but with less intensity. "She was scared," Sarah said simply. "Sometimes babies cry because they feel the desperation of the adults around them. They know when people are trying to make them stop crying instead of listening to why they're crying." She repeated the process with Emma, held her firmly, let her cry without trying to silence her immediately, murmured soothing words. Slowly, Emma also calmed down and accepted some of the bottle. When both babies were sleeping, something that hadn't happened for 3 days, Robert sat heavily in the room's armchair, watching Sarah tidy things with efficient movements. "Where did you learn to do this?" Sarah stopped, an empty bottle in her hand. "Instinct, I think, and experience." "What kind of experience?" She hesitated, as if deciding how much she should reveal. "I worked in a nursery for a while. After Sophie, I thought it would be a way to deal with the loss, caring for other children." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "It didn't work out very well. I got too attached, suffered when they left. But I learned some things." Robert studied her. There was something more there, he felt. A connection with his daughters that went beyond professional experience. "Sarah, what do you think is happening with them? Why do they only calm down with me, and now with you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking at the cribs where Sophie and Emma slept peacefully. "I think they miss their mother," she said quietly. Not consciously, of course. But they were generated by someone who didn't want them emotionally. I think they were born already knowing they weren't completely desired. The words hit Robert like a punch. "Do you think it's my fault for forcing Victoria to—" "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "It's not your fault. Not Victoria's either. Sometimes things are just complicated. But babies are sensitive. They need to feel they're loved unconditionally, that someone is truly present. And you were present, today." Sarah blushed slightly. "I was." Robert leaned forward. "Sarah, I know it's a lot to ask, but could you stay, at least until they stabilize? I'll pay well, more than any nanny." "It's not about money," Sarah interrupted. "Then what is it about?" She looked at the cribs, and Robert saw tears forming in her eyes. "It's about me not knowing if I'll be able to leave here afterward, if I'll be able to say goodbye to them when you don't need me anymore." The brutal honesty of the answer created a loaded silence in the room. Robert realized Sarah was fighting against the same fear he had, the fear of loving something that could be taken from her. "What if I don't want you to leave?" he asked softly. Sarah raised her eyes to him, surprised. "What if we found a way for you to stay, permanently?" For a moment, Sarah seemed hopeful. Then reality returned. "We're from very different worlds, Mr. Thompson." "Robert," he corrected. "And worlds can change, especially when children are involved." Sarah didn't answer, but she also didn't say no. She kept looking at Sophie and Emma, who slept peacefully for the first time since arriving home. "Let me stay tonight," she said finally. "We'll see how they react tomorrow." Robert nodded, knowing that night would change everything between them. For the first time since bringing the girls home, he managed to sleep 4 hours straight. Sarah stayed. One night became a week became a month. Gradually, the house that had been a silent battlefield transformed into something that resembled a home. The girls thrived under her care in a way that surprised even the doctors. They gained weight, developed predictable sleep routines, began to smile, first for Sarah, then for Robert. It was as if her constant presence had given Sophie and Emma the emotional security they needed to simply be babies. But with this stability came complications neither of them had anticipated. Sarah moved to the guest room temporarily, but her things slowly spread throughout the house. Her mugs in the kitchen, her books on the coffee table, the smell of her cheap but comforting perfume permeating the rooms. Robert realized he had begun to think of the house as our house instead of my house. And there were the moments, small instants that seemed to mean more than they should. Sarah humming while bathing the girls. Robert and her laughing together when Sophie made a particularly funny face. The way she touched his arm when she needed to pass him in the narrow kitchen. How they slept in separate rooms but woke up in the middle of the night to check on the babies. Meeting in the dark hallway and whispering about who had heard some noise. It was on a December morning that reality knocked at the door. Robert was in the office when he received the call from his lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, we have a delicate situation. We received a notification from Child Services. Apparently, someone made an anonymous report questioning the care conditions of your daughters." Robert's blood ran cold. "What kind of report?" "They allege that an unqualified person is caring for the children, that there's an irregular living arrangement. They want to make a home visit." Robert hung up with trembling hands. He knew exactly what was happening. One of the nannies who had been dismissed, probably. Or some neighbor who had noticed Sarah coming and going from the house at all hours. When he got home, he found Sarah in the garden with the girls, enjoying the afternoon sun. Sophie was in the stroller, making happy noises at a butterfly flying nearby, while Emma slept peacefully in Sarah's lap. The scene was so perfect, so full of peace, that for a moment Robert almost managed to forget the phone call. "We need to talk," he said quietly, so as not to wake Emma. Sarah immediately noticed from his tone that something was wrong. She put Emma in the stroller next to her sister and followed him into the house. "What happened?" Robert told her about the lawyer's call. He watched the color drain from Sarah's face as he spoke. "It's because of me," she said when he finished. "I knew this would happen." "Sarah?" "No, Robert, I knew. A cleaner living in a rich businessman's house, taking care of his children. Of course someone would question it." Sarah took a step back when Robert tried to approach her. "They're going to investigate our situation. They'll want to know what our relationship is, why you're living here, what your qualifications are to care for the girls." Robert ran his hand through his hair. "My lawyer said if we can't prove it's a legitimate arrangement, they can take the girls from you," Sarah completed. "I won't let that happen." "And what are you going to do? Hire me officially as a nanny, create fake documents, lie to Child Services?" Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand, Robert. I'm a risk to you and to them." "You're not a risk. You're the reason they're well. And I'm also the reason you're being investigated now." Sarah went to her room and started throwing her things into a suitcase. Robert followed her. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done weeks ago, leaving before it's too late." "Sarah, stop. We'll find a solution." She stopped packing clothes and turned to him. There were tears in her eyes, but also a determination he recognized. What solution, Robert? I'm a cleaner without higher education, without official qualifications to care for children. You're a rich businessman with 2 baby daughters. In what world does this make sense to the authorities? In the world where you saved my daughters. In the world where they can only sleep when you're here. In the world where you care about them more than any professional nanny would. Sarah closed her eyes, as if his words hurt. Caring isn't enough. Love isn't enough. You need to understand that. Then what is enough? Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Legitimacy, documents, a relationship that makes sense on paper. She paused. Marriage! The word hung suspended between them like a bomb no one wanted to defuse. Sarah, I know it's crazy. I know we're practically strangers. I know you're still recovering from Victoria and that I'm... She gestured to herself. I'm me, but it's the only way to protect the girls and keep our family together. Our family. It was the first time either of them had used that expression. Would you marry me? Robert asked, incredulous. Really? For the girls, yes. Sarah finished packing the suitcase. But you would never ask me, and you shouldn't. It would be unfair to me and to you. She took the suitcase and walked toward the door. Robert followed her, his heart racing. What if I asked? Sarah stopped in the hallway but didn't turn around. Robert, you don't really know me. You don't know who I am beyond the woman who cleans your office and takes care of your daughters. Then tell me, let me know you. Sarah turned slowly. Her face was wet with tears. Do you really want to know? I grew up in rural Yorkshire in a house without indoor plumbing. I studied until 8th grade because I needed to work to help my family. I came to London without knowing anyone, sleeping in hostels until I got my first job. I lost a baby and a boyfriend in the same year and learned I can't depend on anyone but myself. She wiped her face. That's me, Robert. Are you sure you want to know this person? Robert approached slowly, as if she were a wounded animal that might flee at any sudden movement. Sarah, you're the person who saved my daughters when I couldn't. You're the person who taught me that love doesn't need to be complicated, that sometimes it's just about being present. You're the person who turned this house into a home. He stopped in front of her. It's this person I want to know better. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the girls' room, where Sophie and Emma slept peacefully after an afternoon of sun and play. The child services visit is when? Friday. That's 3 days. It is. Sarah took a deep breath. If I stay, if we do this, it has to be real. It can't just be an arrangement on paper. The girls will grow up, they'll ask questions. They deserve truth. I know. And you have to be sure, because I won't be able to leave again. If I stay, it's forever. Robert thought about everything that had changed since Sarah entered his life. He thought about the girls sleeping peacefully, about the house that finally felt alive, about the peace he felt when she was nearby. Stay, he said. Please. Sarah let the suitcase fall to the floor. All right, she murmured. We'll try. The registry office was almost empty on a Thursday morning. Robert had used his contacts to expedite all the paperwork, and now they were there, 2 people who had known each other for less than a year, about to marry to protect 2 children they both loved more than they had expected. Sarah wore a simple blue dress she had bought the day before. Robert wore a dark suit, the same one he used for important meetings. There were no flowers, music, or guests, just the 2 of them, 2 witnesses the lawyer had provided, and the justice of the peace, who seemed bored with another civil ceremony. "Do you have the rings?" asked the official. Robert took from his pocket 2 simple gold bands he had bought at lunchtime. There hadn't been time for anything elaborate, and even if there had been, he wouldn't have known what to choose. How do you choose rings for a wedding that was real, and at the same time a farce? Robert Thomas Thompson, do you accept Sarah Williams as your wife, to love and respect her in joy and sorrow, in sickness and health, in wealth and poverty, until death do you part? Robert looked at Sarah. She was pale, hands trembling slightly. When their eyes met, he saw fear there, but also determination. I do, he said. Sarah Williams, do you accept Robert Thomas Thompson as your husband, to love and respect him in joy and sorrow, in sickness and health, in wealth and poverty, until death do you part? Sarah hesitated for a second that seemed eternal. Robert felt his heart stop. I do, she murmured. The rings were exchanged with trembling hands. When the judge declared them husband and wife, there was no kiss. Just a formal handshake and a shy smile that didn't reach either of their eyes. Done, said the judge, stamping the documents. Now you are officially married. Outside the registry office, they stood on the sidewalk, not quite knowing what to do next. How do you feel? Robert asked. Strange, Sarah admitted. And you? Like I jumped off a cliff without knowing if there's water below. She laughed, a nervous sound that broke some of the tension. We're going to be all right, she said, more to herself than to him. We are, Robert agreed, wishing it was as simple as it sounded. They returned home, now officially both their home, and found Sophie crying in the crib, while Emma slept peacefully beside her. The temporary nanny they had hired for the morning seemed relieved to see them. She hasn't stopped crying since you left, she explained. Wouldn't take a bottle, wouldn't be held. It's as if she knew you weren't here. Sarah picked Sophie up, and the baby immediately calmed down, snuggling against her shoulder. Robert watched the scene and felt a strange pang in his chest. Relief, tenderness, and something more he couldn't name. Well, said the nanny, taking her bag, looks like you won't need me after all. After she left, Robert and Sarah were alone with the girls. The house was silent, except for the small noises Sophie made while playing with the buttons on Sarah's blouse. And now? Sarah asked. Now, we learn to be married, Robert replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The first week was strange. They circled around each other with careful politeness, like guests in a hotel. Sarah insisted on sleeping in the guest room, despite Robert offering the master bedroom. They divided the tasks with the girls with military efficiency. He took the midnight shift. She handled mornings. They alternated afternoons. Conversations were about practical matters, schedules, medical appointments, shopping. Never about what was happening between them. About how they felt regarding the marriage, about the future beyond the child services visit. The visit happened on a rainy Friday. 2 social workers appeared punctually at 10 in the morning, carrying clipboards and professionally neutral expressions. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, greeted the older of the two, a middle-aged woman with severe glasses. I'm Dr. Hamilton, and this is my colleague, Dr. Davis. We're here to assess the living conditions of the minors, Sophie and Emma. Robert and Sarah took turns showing the house. The baby's room was impeccable, with all necessary safety items. The kitchen was organized and clean. Marriage documents were visible on the living room table, along with the girls' birth certificates and medical appointment receipts. And how long have you been married? Asked Dr. Davis, taking notes. 2 weeks, Sarah replied naturally. Quick relationship, observed Dr. Hamilton. Sometimes you just know, Robert said, taking Sarah's hand. The gesture seemed natural, but he felt her stiffness at the touch. The social workers spent an hour observing their interaction with the girls, asking questions about routines, medical care, future plans. Sophie and Emma behaved perfectly, smiling at the strangers and showing the healthy development they had achieved. The children seem very well adapted, admitted Dr. Hamilton when they were leaving. We'll include our assessment in the report. You should receive a response in a few weeks. After they left, Robert and Sarah looked at each other with evident relief. I think it went well, he said. Better than I expected, Sarah agreed. But when the adrenaline passed, they found themselves again alone, officially married, without quite knowing how to navigate this new reality. It was that night, while preparing dinner in silence, that Sophie started crying in the crib. Both went to check at the same time, colliding in the narrow hallway. For a moment, they were very close. Sarah pressed between Robert and the wall. "Sorry," he murmured, but didn't immediately step away. Sarah raised her eyes to him. For a second, Robert thought she was going to kiss him, or that he was going to kiss her. The moment stretched, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Then Sophie cried louder, breaking the spell. They moved apart quickly, embarrassed. "I'll go see what she wants," Sarah said, avoiding his gaze. That night, Robert lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house. Sarah moving in the room next door, the girls' soft breathing, the tick-tock of the clock on the wall. He thought about the moment in the hallway, about the expression on Sarah's face, about how his heart had raced when she was so close. They had married for convenience, to protect the girls, but something was changing, slowly and inevitably, like water penetrating the cracks in a wall. The question was whether it would bring them together or destroy them. 3 months after the wedding, life had found a rhythm. Sophie and Emma, now 6 months old, filled the house with laughter and happy babbling. They sat with support, played with colorful toys, and had developed distinct personalities. Sophie was curious and restless, always trying to grab everything within reach, while Emma was observant and calm, preferring to study the world around her before acting. Robert and Sarah had become efficient partners in the art of raising twins. They instinctively knew when it was the other's turn to rest, anticipated the girls' needs, worked together with a synchrony that seemed natural, but emotional intimacy continued to be unexplored territory between them, until the morning when everything changed. Robert woke to the sound of Emma crying, but it was a different cry, sharp, desperate. When he got to the girls' room, he found Sarah holding the baby, who was clearly feverish. "She's very hot," Sarah said, her voice tense with worry. "I woke up a few minutes ago and she was like this." Sophie slept peacefully in the crib beside her, oblivious to her sister's crisis. Robert touched Emma's forehead and felt the heat radiating from her skin. "Let's go to the hospital," he said, already heading to get the keys. The children's hospital was crowded, but Emma's fever ensured quick attention. While waiting for test results, Sarah held the baby against her chest, whispering words of comfort that Emma seemed to hear even in the discomfort of fever. "It's just a virus," the pediatrician finally said. "Common in babies this age. With fever reducer and care, she'll be fine in a few days." The relief was immediate, but Robert noticed Sarah was crying. "Hey," he said gently, approaching. "It's all right. She's going to be fine." "I know," Sarah murmured, wiping her eyes. "It's just that. For a moment, I thought I might lose her. And I realized I don't know how to live without them anymore." The raw honesty of the declaration created a loaded silence between them. Emma had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, breathing more peacefully now that the fever was going down. "Sarah," Robert said hesitantly, "may I ask you something?" She nodded. "Do you regret it, the marriage, staying?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Do you want me to be honest?" "Always. I regret how we got here, having needed a crisis to be together. But I don't regret being here." She paused. "And you. I regret not proposing to you the right way. With flowers, with a ring chosen especially, with time for you to think." Robert gently touched Emma's face. "But I don't regret you being my wife." They were the closest words to a declaration either of them had made. On the way home, with Emma stable and drowsy in Sarah's lap, they stopped at the supermarket to buy the prescribed medications. It was there, pushing the cart through the baby product section, that an elderly lady approached. "What a beautiful baby," she commented, smiling at Emma. "Is this your first daughter?" "We have two," Robert replied automatically. "Twins." "What a blessing, and you're so young. You must be learning a lot about being parents." Sarah and Robert looked at each other. For a moment, they saw themselves through the stranger's eyes, a young couple with a baby, buying medicine, taking care of each other and the child with naturalness born from practice. "We're learning," Sarah said, smiling genuinely for the first time in days. When they got home, Sophie greeted them with happy squeals from the stroller where the temporary nanny had placed her to play. The sight of the two sisters together, one still feverish but stable, the other animated and healthy, made something move in Robert's chest. "Sarah," he said that night after both girls were sleeping, "I need to tell you something." They were in the kitchen, cleaning the day's bottles. Sarah stopped what she was doing and turned to him. "What?" I'm falling in love with you." The words came out more direct than he had planned. Sarah was very quiet, a bottle in her hands. "Robert, I know it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I know we married for convenience, for the girls, but I can't pretend it's just that anymore." He approached. "Today at the hospital, when you were afraid of losing Emma, I saw how much you love them. And I realized I love you loving them. I love how you take care of us. I love how you make our house feel complete." Sarah put the bottle on the counter with trembling hands. "You can't be falling in love with me," she said quietly. "Why not?" "Because I've already been in love with you for weeks and was afraid of ruining everything by saying it." This time it was Robert who was silent. Sarah turned completely to him. "I fell in love with you watching how you fight for the girls, how you never gave up, even when you were exhausted and desperate. I fell in love with how you treat me like I'm important, like my opinions matter." She paused. "And I fell in love with how we work together, like a real family." Robert approached until he was right in front of her. "Sarah Thompson," he said, using her married name for the first time. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering, she approached and kissed him first. It was soft, hesitant at first, then more confident when he returned it. When they separated, both were smiling. "So," she said, "are we going to do this right this time?" "What do you mean?" "Dating, engagement, marriage, in the right order, even though we're already married." Robert laughed. "Do you want me to ask you to date me?" "I do." He knelt right there in the kitchen, among the washed bottles and scattered toys. "Sarah Williams Thompson, do you want to date me?" "I accept," she replied, laughing. "And do you want to get engaged to me?" "I accept." "And do you want to stay married to me?" "For real this time." Sarah also knelt, getting to his eye level. "Forever," she said. From the girls' room came the sound of Sophie babbling alone in the crib, practicing sounds that would one day become words. Emma murmured something softly in her sleep, the fever finally completely broken. "Our family," Sarah murmured. "Our family," Robert agreed, and for the first time since they met, there was no fear in the future they imagined, just possibilities, love, and two girls who would grow up knowing they had been loved from the first moment of life. 6 months later, they would renew their vows in a small ceremony in the house's garden, with Sophie and Emma as flower girls in decorated strollers. But that night in the kitchen, kneeling on the floor among the debris of daily life, they already knew they had found something rare, a family built not just by chance or necessity, but by conscious choice of love. End of the narrative.